I'm so happy to see you here today, and I'm happy to be with you. I hope that there's something that you hear today that blesses and heals a part of you. I want to talk with you today about seeing your uniqueness differently. You may think that your uniqueness is a flaw, those things that set you apart from other people, where you feel different, maybe in your family, maybe from the flock, your community, and certainly from all of the television commercials that you see every day. We live in a culture of conformity. Don't look different, don't stand out, go with the flow, and better yet, always look perfect. If you go to any mall and watch teenagers shop, you'll see them exemplify this. Is it possible that what you think is wrong with you is really right with you? I would ask you to say, I won't ask you, I promise I won't ask you to say out loud what you think your uniqueness or your imagined flaws are, but I would invite you to hold them in your heart while we're together just this morning. Just embrace them and hold them. Are you highly sensitive? Do you take in music, art, nature at a very high level? Do you cry like I do when you hear a French horn played that particular piece today? Have you been told that you feel things too deeply and that you're too sensitive? While others may experience joy or happiness, those of us who are too sensitive experience bliss. So I'm thinking that perhaps what we think is a flaw is really a gift from God. So the labels of uniqueness, or flaws, imperfections, or differences, did they come from childhood experiences? When you were told something about you, that you were too slow, too thin, too fat, too quiet, too much for others, you were too dull, perhaps you were impatient, too impulsive. Whatever that too was for you, that's going to point to what you think maybe your uniqueness or your flaw is. Have you pushed away some of these things because you felt you were imperfect? Have you tried to compensate, to disguise them or cover them up? I know some people who have. Are you funny? Are you witty? Are you able to solve problems or puzzles? Can you see and feel things that are unspoken? Are you completely intuitive and there's not a way in the world that you would know cognitively why something's going to happen, but you just know it? Are you a visionary, but have difficulty with dealing with tiny little step-by-step processes? Are you socially awkward? Are you better with animals than you are with people? Are you compulsively tidy? Have I just described myself? Have I just described you? Many of us spent our lives trying to look good, and I've known a few people in my life like that. People who wanted to fit in, to appear perfect, while the flawed, imperfect parts of them tremble that someone might find out that they're imperfect and different in some way, and that they would reject us. I have dyslexia. Anybody here have dyslexia? Judy has dyslexia. Steve has dyslexia. Well, that makes 3 of us. So dyslexia is when the brain sees things differently. And I saw numbers and shapes upside down and I see patterns differently than other people. When you perceive things differently and are set into a normal world where you're expected to read and compute and do those kinds of things, it's really impossible if letters and words and sounds and phonics have absolutely no meaning to you. They just don't register. So, when I was 5, I started school in a rural 2-room schoolhouse in an area of Tennessee, y'all. And our homework at that time was to read a book called Dick and Jane. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Okay. And do you remember Spot and Sally from the primer? Okay. Well, I couldn't read. And what we had to do was recite a page every day. So what I did was I put a little piece of paper in the page we were supposed to read the next day, and I would take it home, and my brother would read the page, and I would memorize it. Fortunately, it wasn't lengthy. And it worked really well, because when I was called on, I just stood up and opened the book and pretended like I could read what I was looking at. Until one day, I memorized the wrong page. And the teacher scolded me, she made fun of me, and the class humiliated me. And in that humiliation was born a sense of shame that there was something wrong with me and I couldn't even cover it up. And now what was I going to do, because I felt powerless and hopeless. My story was that if the world really knows now that I'm defective, they're going to make fun of me, they're going to push me away, and I'm going to be left all alone. So in the 40s, if any of you remember the 40s, kids were labeled smart, dumb, fast, slow, lazy. I thought if I worked harder, I would get smarter and I could learn to read. And to complicate things, in rural Tennessee, those of us who were lefties were forced to use our right hand because they thought left-handed people were of the devil. Some of you are nodding because you've experienced that yourself. So you get a person who sees upside down and backwards to begin with and can't relate to phonics or sounds, and then you switch them from left-handed to right-handed. And this is how I wrote. And I can still write backwards today. Isn't that fun? But it's kind of crazy making if all the world is writing this way and you're writing this way. So what I did was I had a mirror, and I put the book up to the mirror, and I would switch my eyes between the mirror and the book. But the problem was I couldn't tell which was real and which was an image from the mirror, and it was kind of crazy making. So in 1945, we moved to California, and around the 4th grade, something clicked in me. And as an adult now, I realized that what happened was I stopped trying to read each sound in each word. I used word recognition. So the faster I read, the more I comprehended. So I turned in from somebody who couldn't read one word to a person who read voraciously. And I read every book I could find in the school library. Books were my freedom. And the more I read, the happier I became. But again, it backfired on me. So I read all of these books in the library, and I really concentrated on the classics because I wanted to know what made these books great. So I read them. But I was called into the principal's office along with the librarian, who accused me of not really reading the books, just looking at a synopsis of them or the jackets of the books, and they were quizzing me on what the story was and who were the characters. And they went on, and it didn't matter what I said, whether it was correct or not correct, they didn't believe me. And again, I was humiliated. So I went from not being able to read and feeling humiliated to being able to speed read, and I was humiliated again, so it was like a double whammy. So I felt it was a curse rather than a blessing. I felt like my flaws made me a misfit. Is there anybody in here who ever felt like a misfit? Oh, all 7 of us. Interesting. Very good. So 3 years after World War II ended, I know some of you might remember, it was 1948. I was about 10 years old, and I saw a movie that helped me see my uniqueness differently. How many of you saw this movie, The Boy with Green Hair? Well, lucky us, we got to see it. The story was directed by Joseph Losey, who at that time was blacklisted as anti-American because he didn't see the world the way the Americans saw it. He wanted to see peace and tranquility, and he was not pro-war. So in this, he went off to England, and he then directed a couple of other great films. But the film, The Boy with Green Hair, changed how I felt about myself and how I felt about the world. Dean Stockwell played a 12-year-old American boy whose parents had died in the London Blitz, but he didn't know that. When his parents died, he was just shoved from family to family to family, and he ended up with this elderly gentleman. Pat O'Brien played the part of Gramps, who was a relative but not his real grandfather, although they had the same name in the movie. And this old man was a retired vaudevillian performer and who currently was a singing waiter. And he had this Irish charm about him that was so endearing, and he took Peter Fry in and really treated him like his own son or grandson. And Peter felt for the first time that he had a home, and he felt he belonged, and the two of them became a family. So his life was supported not only by this pretend grandfather, but his teacher, and he had a couple of really good friends in school. Do you remember those friends who were in school with him that just really aligned with him? And his teacher was a very beautiful, kind woman, and she organized a clothing drive for orphans. And somehow there was a slip of the tongue where Peter found out that he indeed was a war orphan and that his parents had died. And he was crushed by the news. But he identified with the war orphans, and he wanted to do something for them. And there's a beautiful fantasy in the movie where the people in the pictures came to life and spoke with him and affirmed what he was supposed to do with his life. So he identified with the war orphans and wanted to do something to alleviate the pain and suffering of these children. And he wanted to make a difference by promoting peace and preventing future war. So Peter wakes up the next morning after this fiasco of discovering that he is a war orphan with bright green hair. And the people in the town, it was a very small town, and the minds were not as open as they might have been, and everybody had a different opinion of why he had green hair. But he felt that the meaning of his hair, green stood for hope and life and newness. And it was his mission, his destiny, to let the world know that you have to do everything you can to sustain peace and do everything you can to avoid wars. That was his job. And he felt that his green hair was a sign that people would come to him, it would draw attention, and he would then have an opportunity to talk about his uniqueness and what his destiny was. Well, the townspeople were less than excited about this new strange person with the green hair, and they kind of bullied him into allowing them to cut off his hair. And here he is in the town barber shop, and they've shaved his head off. And it was just more than he could bear. So he kind of ran away from home. And he ended up in a police station talking to a psychologist about his story. And the grandfather and his teacher were there at the police station to rescue him. And they show him a letter that his father and mother had written to him, affirming exactly what he was doing, to live his life, to prevent war, and to sustain the sanctity of life. And it was a very, very touching movie. It's something that really changed how I felt. So what is your green hair? What is your unique way of making a difference in the world? We all have it. When I was in high school, I became aware of a uniqueness that I didn't realize I had. I was called in by the principal and a teacher, which was customary by now. And this teacher was tall and skinny, and he reminded me of Ichabod Crane. You know the character from Sleepy Hollow, the Headless Horseman? Well, that's what he was like. He was tall and skinny, and he talked like this. It was so boring. But the reason I was there is because this teacher was just about to retire, and he had never given anybody an A on an exam. I got an A, and he wanted to know what in the world did I do to make that happen. So I told him. I said, here's what happened. I said, the teacher has a podium on the right side of the platform, and he has a desk on the left side. And sometime during his class, he walks over to the desk and he sits on the corner of his desk. And he takes off his glasses and he puts them in the left side, inside of his jacket pocket, and he pats it twice. And he talks about his granddaughter. And he says a sentence or two, and you can tell that he loves this granddaughter. She mattered to him. And then he would go on and say some things about the course. And I figured, he's got his hand over his heart. This must be important. So I wrote down verbatim what he said every time he did that in class. And those were the questions on the final exam. He didn't realize that I was taking it down verbatim. And how did I know to take those words down? So when I told them the story, it was nothing to me. The two of them were shocked. And I'll tell you the truth, I was shocked too, but for a different reason, because I didn't know everybody in the world didn't do that. I thought everybody used a gift to find information, to get through life. And it was quite ordinary for me, but not for them. Do you want to hear another story? Another example of my uniqueness is to read subtle clues, particularly when someone is being inauthentic. And I worked very closely with a very good friend, and we coined this my crap detector. And everybody has a talent, and that's one of mine. But I used it in a way that was very rewarding. I worked in Beverly Hills for a mortgage broker, and he spent a lot of money with people all over the world investing their money in properties. And some of the people that came to him were not honest or honorable. And when he decided that I had this ability. He had witnessed it. He asked if I would sit in on his meetings and take notes and tell him when people were not being honorable, which I did, and I could also identify when somebody said something, but they meant something else. So I would just jot down what that was and what their response was, and he told me that I had saved him a lot of money, and I was very well paid for my services, and it was always our secret, but now the secret is out. So is your gift to listen to people in a way so they feel like they're the only person on the planet? Do you serve food in a way where people feel that their souls are nourished? Do you tinker in your workshop and show someone how to build or fix something? I heard about a man who lived in a very tiny town, and his gift was shining shoes, and when somebody died in his town, what he did was shine the shoes of everybody in the family, and that was his gift to them so they could show up at their funeral with freshly shined shoes. When my daughter was about 5, we lived on a very, very, very busy street. She loved playing with some neighbors on both sides of us, and down about 5 blocks lived 2 sisters. They were breathtakingly beautiful. They both looked like angels with blonde hair and blue eyes and peachy skin. And the older daughter was differently abled. She couldn't distinguish when she was in trouble or if there was a problem. She couldn't keep herself safe, so she had to be watched very carefully. And one day, I came home from work, and my husband said that this older daughter, while her father was napping, had run out into the street and was killed by a car. And it's just heartbreaking, first of all, for a child to be injured, let alone die. And it's more heartbreaking if you know the family. I didn't know what to do. But that night after dinner, Patricia and I walked down the street, and Patricia played with the remaining child, just as though nothing had happened. And I sat in the living room and listened to the mother cry and tell the story over and over and over again of what happened. I really felt like my hands were tied. I did not know what to say or do. And many months later, she said to me that I was the only friend who came over and sat with her in her time of need, and it meant the world to her. Who knew such a small act would mean so much to a mother who'd lost a child? So what is your uniqueness? I want to know. So before you leave here today, I expect you to tell me what it is on your way out. So my ability to see things differently is not unique. It's just what it is for me, and yours is unique to you. So are you the kind of person who can create a garden and then share your bounty with others? Is that your gift? There's the ancient story of the Sufis that you may recognize. It's told in many different ways. And the version I heard is about 450 AD. It's about the time when the crossbow was invented. And the story is in ancient China. It's a story of a farmer, his wife, and his teenage son. And they're poor, poor, poor. And one day, they go out to the well and they see a beautiful white horse in their corral. And the wife is beside herself, says, "This is wonderful. Now we have a horse. We can plow the field. We can plant some grains. We'll have something to eat. This is wonderful." And the farmer says, "Maybe it's a blessing. Maybe it's a curse. Only God knows." The next day, they go out to the well, and the horse is gone. And the wife is furious. She said, "Yesterday, at least I had hope. Today, I have nothing. We have nothing, nothing, nothing." And the farmer says, Maybe it's a blessing. Maybe it's a curse. Only God knows. The next day they go to the well, and what do they find but 4 beautiful white horses in their corral? And the wife is beside herself with joy. She said, "This is more than I could even want. Now we have a horse to plow the field, we have a horse to drive a cart to the market, and we can even have horses to ride. This is wonderful." You'll never guess what the farmer said. He said, "Maybe it's a blessing, maybe it's a curse, only God knows." So the teenage son jumps on the back of one of the horses, and before long he falls off and he breaks his leg. And his mother runs to him crying, my son, this is horrible." And she turns to her husband, who says, shortly after that, an emissary from the emperor comes, and he's gathering all the young men in the villages because there's going to be a huge battle, and he wants all the able-bodied people. But they couldn't take the son. Why? He broke his leg. So the father says, and the story goes on, and you can create it any way you want to. So what we consider a curse, a flaw, a uniqueness, something that's not right about us, is really right about us. And it's not a curse. It's a blessing if we see it that way. So my destiny is to help people see the world differently, because I see the world differently, upside down, backwards, inside out. That's what I can share with other people. And I've used that by becoming a teacher, and I teach in a federal prison, and I help inmates see themselves and the world differently. And I give them unity tools. I give them tools to calm themselves, to problem solve, to master their minds and their hearts, create different kinds of relationships through their communication. And my goal one day is to have this course that is on film, I should say, in all of the prisons of the world, along with the books that go with them. That's my dream. I notice that when I'm living my dream, my heart is open. If I'm giving what I'm supposed to do, I allow love in and I let love out. But when I'm hiding and afraid that somebody's going to see a flaw, a uniqueness, my heart shuts down and I can't take love in and I can't give love out. Maybe you've experienced that at some time in your life or not. So many of us have a part of us that is unhealed, believing that we can't do what others can do. We aren't strong enough or filled with enough health or abundance or joy, or we have no right to be happy. It's just a story. We are enough. We have enough. We do enough. A more accurate story is that our uniqueness is a part of our connection to God. We are filled by God, of God, and the love of God is lived through us. Yet we sometimes forget how filled, how loved, how capable and talented we are, how graced we are, and that's when friends come in behind us and remind us, and we can do the same for them. So honor your uniqueness. Our uniqueness is God expressing through us in our own special way. Let's be so busy accepting ourselves and our uniqueness and the uniqueness of others that we have no time to worry about our flaws or who doesn't like us. Let's be the voice, arms, and legs of Christ. Let's bless and heal the planet in our unique, wonderful ways. Let's be the calm in the eye of the storm. Let's be the answer to the problems that we see. Let's show the world what unity, compassion, and acceptance look like? And would you say this with me together? Let's be examples of God's love as it is expressed on earth. May you be richly blessed.